Hello and welcome to the Strategic Analysis Group. I am Mohammad Bilal Iftikhar Khan. Today I am joined by a very special guest, Irina Tsukerman. Irina is a distinguished lawyer and a political commentator based in New York, known for her keen insights into international relations and global security dynamics. As a journalist and academic, I believe that truth is relative. What is true for one person may not be same for another. However, engaging with diverse perspectives is crucial for deepening our understanding of complex realities on the ground. By listening to voices like Arena, we can enrich our analysis and get closer to understanding nuanced interplay of global and regional politics. In this episode, we delve into unfolding developments in Syria and their broader implications for Middle East and beyond. We explore critical questions including how do Israel and United States view the recent advances of resistance in Syria and what do these changes mean for their regional strategies? What might the resistance gain in Syria means for Israeli-Palestinian conflict and Iran-Israel relations? Could the resurgence of violence in Syria signal a major shift in regional order or will current power dynamics remain intact? How will these developments impact balance of power among key regional players like Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and their relationships with Western powers? What role can international organizations such as United Nations play in addressing the humanitarian crisis in Syria and fostering peaceful resolution? Join us as Irina shares her insights, helping us navigate these pressing issues and understand the evolving dynamic of Middle East. Hi, Irina. You have heard the questions.
So the United States essentially is concerned about the developments in Syria, but they've expressed very clearly that the U.S. has nothing to do with the HTS advances, that Assad had it coming due to his corruption, mismanagement of the country, and alliances with Russia and Iran, and of course his human rights abuses and his role during the Syrian civil war. They made clear that U.S. will protect its own interests. It will continue to protect the commitments to oil in Syria, and it will continue to protect the U.S. personnel stationed in Syria, but it will have no other direct involvement concerning the Syrian situation. However, as we can see, U.S. has also taken the opportunity to attack the IRGC convoys trying to deliver assistance to the pro-Assad forces in Syria. So clearly, while U.S. is not getting directly involved in Syria, it is protecting indirect interests such as trying to manage and limit the role of Iran in this issue. And of course, U.S. benefits from Russia's expulsion from Syria, from the scramble, which is causing a collapse of Russian offensive in Ukraine, for instance, in Kherson Oblast. A significant number of Russian soldiers had to either flee or had to be recalled to assist in Syria, and a lot of the Russian forces also abandoned Syria. All of that, of course, is perceived to be in the U.S. Interest, even if the radical and Turkey-backed factions that are likely to take power are not what U.S. had in mind for peaceful political transition, which they're still hoping would happen eventually. Israel is mostly concerned on destabilization of the borders. They're likely to be sending IDF contingents into the Golan Heights and other borders in Syria to ensure that their sovereignty is not violated either directly or inadvertently as a result of clashes. There are multiple perspectives inside Israel on this. Many believe that Assad's role in facilitating Iranian attacks on Israeli borders is rightfully coming to an end, especially after some of the Syrian resistance fighters made commitments for what they're worth, that they will not be attacking Israel, and most likely in the beginning stages, at least, it will not be their direct priority. Their priority is going to be political survival. Of course, many of them are radical. They come from jihadist backgrounds, and this also means that in due course they may very well find Israel an easy and desirable target, much as ISIS has done. But in the first stages, then not as direct a threat to Israel as Assad and Iranian forces, and even Russia, which was lately engaged in surveillance of Israeli troops, are. So I think Israel, while cautious and unlikely to intervene directly, other than protecting its borders, probably prefers a situation where Assad is either significantly weakened along with Iran and other supporters, or is gone altogether, and there's an opening to some sort of a transition, even if temporarily there's some sort of a chaos. In terms of regional strategies, I don't think either country has one for the time of being. I think US is simply taking tactical opportunity. The reason being is that US itself is in transition. Biden is leaving office. Trump is very likely to want to withdraw US forces from Syria, but not until there's some point of stability there. And it's hard to say what the new administration will do about it, other than taking tactical action to ensure the safety of its own interests. I do think if they come to believe that the new powers or the resistance movements in Syria represent some sort of a threat similar to Al Qaeda or ISIS, they will take more decisive action. But I think they will probably adopt a wait and see period until the situation clears up. Regarding Israel, now that they've settled the affairs with Hezbollah for the next 60 days at least, they may have more availability and flexibility to deal with anything coming out of Syria. But again, the hope is that the Syrian resistance will focus on internal affairs and will not be directly confronting Israel until the situation has stabilized, at least, which will allow Israel to strategize and to put up clear deterrents on the borders to avoid any sort of threat. Until the resistance is in power and has access to more advanced weapons, they are far less of a threat than Assad, a state actor, and the RGC contingent there. Now, of course, there is a serious concern what happens if Turkey gets far more directly involved. For instance, if Turkey does not merely propel the Syrian resistance to power, but installs a puppet dictator with full access to weapons, with some backing by the Turkish military, if they decide to attack Israel directly. But once again, so far there is no clear evidence that that's going to be the case, and I think Israel right now is reacting very tactically, wait and see what actually happens. And for now, the clear and present danger is in Assad, Iranians, or some inadvertent clashes on the borders, and not in a theoretical prospect of more direct Turkish intervention. Regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the Iranian nuclear issue, I don't think the Syrian clashes will affect the Gaza situation in any serious way, other than as a potential temporary distraction from the discussions about the Gaza conflict, because I think the Gulf states are very concerned about Syrian destabilization. UAE in particular was lately quite invested in Assad in reconstruction projects. They also have some positive dynamic with Turkey lately, but it's not clear what direct role Turkey will play under the current circumstances. So there's a lot of chaos right now. There's concern about investments, about security. None of the Gulf states are particularly fond of Muslim Brotherhood and jihadist movements or organizations. So there's concern about this sort of ideological extremism spreading. So I think they'll be watching it very carefully. I think that in some ways the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is for them will remain a priority in order to at least project some optics of control over the situation, precisely because they have no control over the situation at all, whether in Gaza or in Syria. But I think they will. Well, right now we are facing some distraction. I think very quickly they will resume the efforts to try to bring the Trump administration into some sort of a strategy regarding Gaza. Regarding the Iranian nuclear issue, that also is not going away simply because Iran is about to lose its major ally in Syria. I think Iran in the future will try to co-opt the Syrian resistance movement, just as it has tried to co-opt the Taliban in Afghanistan, despite that being, a hardcore Sunni fundamentalist group. I think we will see that Iran will try to reclaim a role in Syria because it is of a very high strategic value. Assad was a weak link. I think having some sort of a jihadist group facing some competition from other similar groups will actually prove in some ways more manageable for Iran in terms of penetrating Syria and using it as a corridor for transportation, and it will not affect its nuclear file because those are two separate issues dealt with by separate authorities. And I think for Iran, nuclear development is also a strategic leverage against the West and for engaging in potential diplomacy with the Trump administration. So they will not abandon it just because of a potential loss of territory or influence in Syria. And once again, I don't think Iran will wait too long to try to make a different sort of move or come to some sort of arrangement with Turkey, which is not always easy. In terms of the shift in the regional order, yes, we're seeing a realignment. The realignment is most of all impacting Russia. Russia was resurging thanks to normalization with Assad, thanks to Syria. Assad was one of Russia's main assets in the regions and main ways of making a comeback into the Middle East vis-a-vis Israel and the United States. Now Russia is rapidly losing its hold. So the two possible scenarios is that Russian influence is either be displaced by Iran if Iran it sufficiently aids Assad to retain power, or it will cede influence to Turkey if the Syrian resistance movements come to power. So it will. So Russia is the biggest loser here. They're losing an opportunity to access military bases in Syria. Those bases could be co-opted or destroyed entirely. Of course, it may lose its significant hold in Ukraine as well, depending on how things go in the Middle East, but they are likely to be significantly weakened. They will be looking for ways to reassert themselves, but it will not be easy because they've suffered very heavy human, financial, and infrastructural and military losses throughout the war in Ukraine. China is going to try to make a move, just as it has in Afghanistan, to build its hold, to create some sort of an agreement with whoever ends up in charge, and potentially also sees an opening to advance its military ambitions in the Middle East, which have been slow going because China is reluctant to deal with jihadist groups' destabilization. But as long as whoever ends up in charge in Syria is relatively stable, does not attack Chinese interests in the region, I think they will proceed with the plan as usual. They will just reconfigure with either continue the cooperation with Assad if he stays, or try to reconfigure their relationship with the Syrian resistance if they ultimately end up in power. And I think they'd be more than willing to normalize the resistance as long as they feel that they have sufficient hold to be a permanent presence. Turkey, Iran, and Saudi Arabia are going to be finding themselves in a very complicated relationship. Iran temporarily is dealing with a major blow as a result of Assad being weakened and potentially losing territory. This is where Turkey could come to challenge Iran much more significantly. Turkey is looking to rebuild an Ottoman Empire to create a bulwark against the Kurdish autonomy, and also to offset Iranian influence, despite the fact that Turkey and Iran cooperate on many issues, particularly against the West. At the end of the day, they also have a lot of geopolitical competition along them. So these two are facing off in Syria, and so far Turkey is making significant gains. And let's recall, Turkey is taking advantage of the fact that Hezbollah has been weakened by Israeli operations. Hamas has been weakened. Even their GCK suffered significant losses, and Iran's prestige has been also has been taken down a notch after Israeli attacks on its territory and assassinations and so forth. Saudi Arabia will most likely look to come to terms and grow closer with Turkey over this issue, because Syria for them is a strategic concern, both in terms of economic endeavors and political endeavors. I think this will also serve Saudi Arabia as a potential to kind of put pressure or leverage on Iran over various financial and economic matters, with Syria being sort of led by a different sort of ally, that different sort of semi-ally or quasi-ally frenemy rather than a direct enemy. We could see a shift in those relations. And of course, one could argue that Erdogan is opposed to any sort of Arab leadership in the region, which is very well true, but he is also pragmatic, and he will likely much more strengthen his relations with Saudis in the short term to acquire the economic support he needs to build up Syria to his own image and liking. I don't think this will completely break Iran away from Saudis. I think there's too much financial interest at stake elsewhere, but I do think that Saudis could end up with more leverage with respect to those specific issues, and we could still see some continued form of cooperation on a political level, particularly to pressure the United States into concessions. We have seen recently that Saudis dropped their efforts to get to a defense treaty with the US. The alleged excuse was the lack of progress over Gaza with Israel, but considering that that particular treaty was in the second half of negotiations, independent of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I think the issue is elsewhere. I think Saudis are waiting to see what happens in Syria as well as with the Trump administration before resuming these discussions, and I think that angle of it could be affected by what happens with Turkey's potential rise in Syria. Will they still want that treaty if they feel they're getting what they need out of a closer relationship with Turkey, or if Turkey, on the other hand, will leverage its proximity in Syria and its jihadist groups as a potential threat against Saudi Arabia? I think a lot will depend on that, and I think the Saudis will consider the relationship with the US in very much in terms of that development. And it's too early to tell how things go, because it's not clear whether Assad will manage to maintain his hold in power or not. In terms of the UN, they have been playing a disastrous role in resolving any conflicts in the region for the time being. At best, maybe they could send some peacekeepers to protect civilian populations. The Kurdish and Christian populations are very likely to be under attack as a result of the growth of these jihadist groups and potentially Turkey's strengthening hand. But I'm not too optimistic that they will play any significant stabilizing role. I'm not sure that they will even assist the civilians all that much. I don't think they're taken seriously in terms of any sort of political transition and resolution, especially given their failures during the civil war in Syria. And I think there'll be other alliances and blocs that could play a more significant role. But I don't think UN as an institution is necessarily going to be taken very seriously, nor do they have the necessary leverage or the tools to really resolve the ongoing conflict. They certainly don't have any military power to put an end to any sort of fighting. I think the international influence, the global international interest, will diminish in the Middle East as a result of UN's lack of usefulness. I think there'll be a growth in regional alliances that are going to be seen as far more constructive. I think China will try to play a major role in reconstruction, not so much in stabilization, because they haven't really been too involved in that previously, but they in reconstruction in some sort of a political background role in in economic endeavors. They're far more likely to emerge as a potential and more visible power than even before, unless the U.S. chooses to be very active in Syria under Trump. And I think the humanitarian crisis, too, we will see that the UN will try to fundraise and so forth, but in terms of actors on the ground, individual countries and other alliances will play a far greater role.
Thank you, Irina, for such an enlightening and thought-provoking conversation. As they say, the art of strategy is skill that require us to train our minds, moving beyond tactical thinking to truly understand the bigger picture and the ground reality. Your insights have provided us with clearer understanding of how people in the West, especially in the United States, perceive the situation, as well as the complexities of the evolving dynamics in Middle East. It's through these discussions that we can challenge our perspective and enhance our analytical depth. And again, I will say the truth is relative, and one man's truth may not be others' truth. But studying both truths help us to understand things and build or project what is going to happen in future. Once again, thank you for your time and for sharing your expertise with us. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Strategic Analysis Group for more engaging conversations with thought leaders from around the world. Until next time, stay curious, keep exploring the truth from all sides. Take care.
अगर आपको हमारा काम पसंद आया है तो वीडियो को लाइक कीजिए, चैनल को सब्सक्राइब कीजिए, कमेंट करके अपना फीडबैक दीजिए और अपने दोस्तों के साथ वीडियो लिंक को शेयर कीजिए।